The air in the nexus of Providence was as cold and still as the void between stars. It was a chamber carved from the heart of a singularity-forged obsidian asteroid, a place where the gravity of decision was a palpable force. High Executor Valen stood before the conclave, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the shimmering hologram of a world suspended in the center of the hall, a vibrant sphere of swirling white clouds, deep blue oceans, and continents of green and brown. Earth. The source of their present and perhaps final great debate. For generations, the dominion of Cathar had expanded, bringing order to the chaotic arms of the galaxy. Their methods were absolute, their logic unyielding. Chaos was the enemy of existence, and uncontrolled growth was the seed of chaos. Species were assessed, their potential weighed, and they were either guided into the structured harmony of the dominion or they were pruned, their volatile futures extinguished before they could threaten the stability of millennia. But this world, this Earth, was an anomaly that defied their calculus. "It is a festering wound," declared Lord Strategist Zythok, his voice a low chittering that echoed in the vastness of the Nexus. His carapace, a polished blend of crimson and gold, marked him as a warrior of high standing, a proponent of swift, decisive action. He gestured a sharp, chitinous limb towards the hologram. "For cycles we have observed, we have seen nothing but paradox. They transmit signals of exquisite mathematical purity, artistic expressions of profound emotional depth, and philosophies that touch upon the universal truths we ourselves hold sacred. And in the same breath, they broadcast images of ritualized self-destruction, of tribal conflicts waged with weapons that poison their own cradle. They are a species at war with itself, a house divided, and it will inevitably fall. When it does, its collapse will send ripples of instability through this entire sector." Valen remained silent, his gaze fixed on the slowly rotating world. He had studied the same data, the same confounding transmissions. He had listened to their music, these humans, and felt a strange resonance in his core, a vibration of sorrow and hope that the logical Cathari mind was ill-equipped to process. He had watched their wars, their senseless, brutal purges of their own kind, and felt the cold, familiar logic of Zythok's argument. They were a threat. They were unstable. And yet, there was something more. A pattern hidden within the noise, a signal that whispered of a potential so vast it was terrifying. "Your solution, Lord Strategist, is as always the cauterizing flame," Valen finally spoke, his own voice a deeper, more resonant baritone that carried the weight of his age and his many campaigns at the edge of Dominion space. "You see a weed, and you would burn the entire garden to ensure it does not spread. Have you considered that some of the most resilient blooms grow from the harshest soil?" A murmur rippled through the assembled members of the conclave, their forms shrouded in the tiered seating that rose into the darkness of the chamber's upper reaches. They were the arbiters of galactic order, beings who had guided the Dominion for eons, and they were not accustomed to such philosophical diversions when matters of security were at stake. "Philosophy is a luxury we cannot afford when faced with an exponential threat," Zythok countered, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "Their technological progress is erratic but alarmingly fast. Their mastery of fission, their primitive but effective rocketry, their fledgling ventures into their own star system, they are like children playing with cosmic fire. We have a duty to them as much as to ourselves to intervene, to bring them into the fold under our guidance. If they resist, then we pacify. It is the logical, necessary course. It is the foundation upon which the Dominion is built." "The foundation of the Dominion was built upon understanding, Zythok," Valen replied, turning his gaze from the hologram to meet the Lord Strategist's fiery eyes. "We did not rise to dominance by crushing every unfamiliar life form we encountered. We rose by comprehending the universal laws, by seeing the larger patterns. And there is a pattern here we do not yet comprehend. Their chaos, it seems to drive them. Their art is born from their pain. Their science is fueled by their fear of their own mortality. They are self-destructive, yes, but they are also relentlessly self-improving. To pacify them now would be to silence a voice we have not yet understood. It would be an act not of order, but of fear." The word hung in the cold air. Fear. It was an emotion the Cathar prided themselves on having mastered, a primitive impulse relegated to the unenlightened species they governed. To suggest that the conclave, the very heart of the Dominion, could act out of fear was a profound accusation. An ancient voice, thin and dry as dust, emanated from the highest tier of the chamber. It was matriarch Lythara, her body now more a vessel of ancient wisdom than a physical form. "High Executor Valen speaks of patterns. What pattern do you perceive that eludes the rest of us? The data archives are clear. This species is a contagion of emotional excess. Valen inclined his head in respect. Matriarch, I perceive resilience. In every transmission of their self-inflicted disasters, in every recording of their planet-scarring wars, there is a countersignal, a broadcast of unity, a story of beings who rush into fire to save others, a song composed in the depths of despair that reaches for a note of hope. They fall and they rise again, stronger. They wound themselves and they learn to heal. They are a paradox not of weakness, but of a strength we have never encountered. A strength born not from rigid order, but from the mastery of chaos itself. I do not know if it is a threat or a salvation, but I know that to act with incomplete understanding would be the greatest strategic error in the history of the Dominion. Zythok let out a hiss of contempt. Emotional poetry. You have been listening to their transmissions for too long, Valen. You have become infected by their sentimentality. The course is clear. A fleet must be dispatched. A show of force undeniable and absolute. We will arrive in their system and we will offer them the choice, integration or oblivion. Their resilience will be tested against the indomitable will of the Cathar. Then we will see the true nature of their strength. The debate raged for what felt like an eternity, the cold, logical arguments of the Dominion's military faction clashing with Valen's cautious, philosophical appeals. He stood his ground, a lone pillar of doubt against a tide of certainty. He argued that their very unpredictability was a reason for caution, that a species that had harnessed the atom while still believing in gods and ghosts was a psychological puzzle they could not afford to solve with a hammer. But the fear that he had named was a powerful undercurrent. The fear of the unknown, the fear of a variable that did not fit their galactic equation. In the end, as it so often did, fear masqueraded as prudence. The matriarch's voice descended once more, casting the final judgment. The risk of inaction outweighs the risk of action. The potential for contagion is too great. A fleet will be assembled. It will proceed to the target system designated Sol. It will establish a containment field and deliver the Dominion's ultimatum. Her ancient gaze settled on Valen. High Executor, you will command this fleet. Your unique perspective on this species may prove valuable in the initial contact. You will see firsthand whether their resilience is a foundation for a new ally or merely the last defiant gasp of a failed experiment. The will of the conclave is decided. Valen lowered his head, a gesture of acquiescence that felt like a profound defeat. He had not prevented the expedition, he had only been placed at its head. It was a political masterstroke. If he succeeded in a peaceful integration, his caution would be lauded. If he failed and was forced into a pacification, his arguments would be silenced forever, and Zythok's path would be validated. He was being sent to test his own hypothesis, with the fate of an entire world resting on the outcome. As the hologram of Earth dissolved into motes of light, Valen felt a cold dread coalesce in his being. He was a creature of logic and order, leading a fleet of overwhelming power to confront the embodiment of chaos. And for the first time in his long life, he was not certain which side held the true advantage. The journey through the void was a silent, sterile affair. Valen stood on the command bridge of the Indomitable Will, the flagship of the pacification fleet. Around him, the Cathari crew moved with practiced, silent efficiency, their thoughts and actions linked through a subtle neural interface. The bridge was a hemisphere of polished obsidian, mirroring the nexus, but here, instead of a single hologram, the walls were a living star chart, a tapestry of captured light from 1,000 conquered worlds and 1,000,000 monitored suns. The fleet was a magnificent sight, a collection of void-blackened warships that moved not as individual vessels, but as a single, cohesive organism. They were the physical manifestation of the Dominion's power, each ship a blade honed over centuries of enforcing order. They tore a hole in space-time, crossing galactic arms in moments, the universe bending to their technological supremacy. Yet, as they drew closer to the small, yellow star-designated Sol, Valen felt none of the familiar pride or certainty that usually accompanied such a deployment. His mind kept returning to the human signals, to a piece of their music, a complex, cascading arrangement for stringed instruments that seemed to contain the entire spectrum of existence, from profound sorrow to ecstatic joy, all in the space of a few heartbeats. How could a species capable of creating such a thing also be capable of such mindless destruction? It was a contradiction that gnawed at the very foundations of his Cathari logic. Order and chaos were supposed to be opposing forces. One could not give rise to the other. His second-in-command, Sub-Executor Tikor, approached, his movements precise and deferential. High Executor, we are approaching the outer marker of the target system. Scanners are detecting a rudimentary satellite network, primitive chemical propellant craft, and a single orbital station, all consistent with a Tier 2 civilization on the cusp of interstellar awareness. No signs of advanced energy signatures, no unexpected fleet dispositions, Valen asked, his gaze fixed on the single, brilliant point of light that was their destination. None, High Executor. Their system is quiet, exactly as the long-range probes reported. They are contained on their world and its immediate satellites. They are vulnerable. Valen's mandibles tightened. Vulnerable. That was the word Zythok had used. It was the word that had sealed this world's fate in the Nexus. But a deep, instinctual part of him, an ancestral remnant of a time before the Cathar had achieved perfect logic, screamed that this was wrong. It felt too simple. A trap not of weapons and energy fields, but of misperception. Bring the fleet to a holding position at the system's edge, Valen commanded. Full sensor sweeps. I want to know the composition of the dust between their planets. I want every radio wave, every gravimetric distortion analyzed. We will not be blindsided by our own arrogance. T-Corps bowed and retreated, relaying the orders. The vast fleet, a swarm of predatory shadows, slowed its inexorable advance, coming to a halt in the cold, dark sea of the Uit cloud. For hours they listened. The data flooded the indomitable Will's logic cores. It was a deluge of noise, the chaotic cacophony they had expected. Countless broadcasts, all in primitive radio frequencies, carrying their entertainment, their news, their endless, trivial conflicts. It was the background radiation of a young, foolish species, blissfully unaware of the gods who had just arrived at their doorstep. Then something changed. From the maelstrom of signals, a single, coherent beam emerged. It was not aimed at them. It was aimed at the void, a general broadcast, but its structure was unlike anything else they had intercepted. It was pure mathematics, a sequence of prime numbers, a visual representation of their own star system's orbital mechanics. The value of pi calculated to 1,000 decimal places. It was a greeting. A universal message of intelligence, of a mind reaching out, not in fear, but in curiosity. High Executor, T-Corps' voice was laced with a new tone, one of confusion. The signal, it is new. It began broadcasting the moment our fleet translated from hyperspace. It is as if they knew we were here. Valen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the bridge. They did not detect our transit. That is impossible. Our drives leave no temporal signature. And yet the correlation is perfect, T-Corps insisted, his appendages flying across a holographic console. The timing is not a coincidence. They are responding to our arrival. Before Valen could process this impossibility, a new alert flashed across the main view screen. A single object had detached from the orbit of the third planet. It was small, impossibly small compared to the gargantuan warships of the Dominion fleet. It was moving towards them with a speed that, while impressive for a primitive drive, was laughably slow by their standards. One vessel, T-Corps reported, his voice tight. No detectable weapon signatures, minimal energy shielding. Its drive is unconventional, not chemical, not fission. It appears to be a contained singularity drive, but of a design so elegant and efficient it defies our engineering principles. A singularity drive, a technology the Dominion had only perfected after centuries of research, a technology that was the very key to their galactic dominance. And this supposedly primitive species was using it on a tiny, unarmed ship. The trap, Valen realized, was not of misperception. It was of a scale so vast he had been unable to even conceive of it. They had not been observing a tribe of children playing with fire. They had been observing a giant who was pretending to sleep. They are hailing us, T-Corps announced, his tone now one of undisguised awe. On screen, Valen commanded, his voice a low growl. He straightened to his full, imposing height, the embodiment of Dominion authority. He would not show his shock. He would not show his dawning fear. The view screen, which had shown the starfield and the approaching vessel, shimmered and resolved into the image of a single being. A human. It was a female of the species, her features symmetrical, her skin pale. Her hair was dark and coiled neatly behind her head. Her eyes, two dark orbs, held a calmness that was utterly unnerving. She was seated in a simple chair against a stark white background. There was no military uniform, no ceremonial regalia. She wore a simple, dark blue garment. She looked not like a warrior facing a conqueror, but like a scholar prepared for a dissertation. I am Ambassador Eva Rostova, the human said. Her voice was calm, the Cathari language flowing from her lips with perfect, unaccented fluency. There was no trace of a translation device. She was speaking their tongue as if born to it. On behalf of the unified peoples of Earth, I welcome you to the Sol system. We have been expecting you. The silence on the bridge of the indomitable will was absolute. Every K-Theory crew member was frozen, their minds struggling to reconcile the data they had gathered for cycles with the reality that was now displayed before them. This was not a primitive. This was not a chaotic, divided species on the brink of self-destruction. This was something else entirely. Valen stared into the eyes of the human ambassador, and for the first time he understood the pattern he had only glimpsed. It was not a pattern of chaos and order. It was a pattern of deliberate, masterful deception. Earth was not a cradle of nascent life. It was a stage, and the play had only just begun. Valen held the human's gaze, a silent battle of wills across the void. The composure of Ambassador Rostova was a weapon in itself, more potent than any energy beam. It was a statement of power that needed no demonstration. The K-Theory were masters of control, both of their emotions and their environment, but this human displayed a serenity that felt ancient, an unshakable core of stillness that Valen had only ever seen in the oldest matriarchs of his own species. Ambassador Rostova, Valen began, his voice carefully modulated to betray none of the turmoil in his mind. I am High Executor Valen of the Dominion of Cathar. Your presence and your command of our language is unexpected. Our observations indicated your species was not yet capable of unified interstellar communication. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of the ambassador's mouth. It was not a smile of amusement or superiority, but of patient understanding. Your observations were accurate, High Executor. The civilization you observed on Earth is disunified. It is chaotic. It is a society in its adolescence, struggling with the very paradoxes you have no doubt debated in your high councils. What you failed to observe is that which does not wish to be seen. The implications of her statement settled over the bridge like a shroud, deception on a planetary scale, a civilization hiding behind a facade of its own turbulent youth. Valen felt the foundations of his mission, of his entire worldview, beginning to crack. The Dominion's strength was in its information, its complete and total understanding of any given strategic situation. They had been operating on a lie. Explain yourself, Ambassador, Valen commanded, his tone hardening. We have not crossed the galaxy to engage in riddles. Our purpose here is clear. The Dominion has determined that the unchecked growth of your species poses a potential threat to galactic stability. We have come to offer you a place within our order, a path to stability guided by our wisdom. Rostova's expression did not change. Her calm was a deep, placid ocean, and Valen's words were mere stones skipped across its surface. We appreciate the offer, High Executor, and we understand your reasoning. From your perspective, it is entirely logical, but we must respectfully decline. Earth is not a candidate for integration. It is a preserve, a sanctuary. The word sanctuary echoed in Valen's mind. It was a term the Cathar used for worlds set aside for the study of primitive life, worlds that were never to be interfered with. But she was not speaking of her people as primitives. The implication was far more profound. A sanctuary for whom? Valen pressed. For the part of ourselves that you witnessed, she replied. For the chaos, for the struggle, for the pain and the art and the irrational hope that springs from it. We learned long ago that our species' greatest strength, our creativity, our adaptability, our empathy, is forged in that crucible. To eliminate it, to enforce a perfect, logical order would be to extinguish the very fire that allows us to become more than we are. So we preserve it. We allow a portion of our civilization to grow unguided, to make its own mistakes and find its own way, while the rest of us watch and learn. The bridge of the indomitable will was so quiet Valen could hear the low hum of the ship's life support systems. The concept was utterly alien to the Cathari mind. To deliberately cultivate chaos, to allow a segment of one's own species to suffer and struggle for the sake of some abstract philosophical growth. It was madness. It was the most illogical, inefficient, and dangerous social strategy he had ever encountered. And yet, it explained everything. The paradox of their signals, the simultaneous existence of brutality and breathtaking beauty. One was the raw material for the other. From a secondary comms channel, a furious, chittering voice cut through the silence. It was Zythok, monitoring the exchange from the Dominion's central command. This is preposterous, a trick. High Executor, do not listen to this human's deceptive words. She is stalling. They are a fractured species trying to project an image of unity to forestall the inevitable. Break off communications and commence the pacification protocol. Show them the true meaning of order. Valen ignored him. His focus was entirely on the woman on the screen. He sensed no deception in her. He sensed a truth so vast and so alien that it was shaking him to his core. "You claim that what we have observed is merely a preserve," Valen said slowly, testing the weight of the word. "This implies that there is another part of your civilization, a larger part. Where is it, Ambassador? Our sensors show nothing. This system is empty, save for your world and its satellites." This was the moment, the pivot upon which everything would turn. Rostova's gaze seemed to pierce through the screen, through the void, and into Valen's very being. She raised a hand, and the stark white background behind her dissolved, replaced by a live, three-dimensional star chart. It pulsed with a soft, blue light. It was a map of the galaxy. Valen's breath caught in his throat. It was not just any map. It was a perfect, real-time representation of Dominion space. Every star system, every fleet movement, every hidden outpost, all displayed with an accuracy that even the Dominion's own high command could not achieve. Tiny icons, representing Cathari fleets, moved in synchronized patterns. His own fleet was a bright, angry red cluster at the edge of the chart. "We are where we have always been, High Executor," Rostova said, her voice now carrying a new gravity. "We are in the silent spaces between stars. We are in the habitats carved into rogue planets, adrift in the dark. We are in the sentinel stations that ride the gravity wells of black holes. We are the observers you never saw because we mastered the art of not being seen. We have been aware of your dominion for thousands of your years. We have charted its growth, studied its philosophy, and predicted its every move." She made a subtle gesture, and the map zoomed in, focusing on the Cathar homeworld, a system thousands of light years away. A small, insignificant moon orbiting the system's gas giant was highlighted. "To demonstrate our reach," she said calmly, "we will now perform a minor and fully reversible adjustment to the energy output of your primary orbital defense grid around Cathar Prime's third moon. Please do not be alarmed." On a secondary screen on Valen's command console, a live data feed from the homeworld suddenly flashed with alerts. A sensor reading from the exact location Rostova had indicated showed a momentary, impossibly precise fluctuation in its power grid. It was a flicker, lasting less than a second, harmless but undeniable. An event that should have been physically impossible to orchestrate from this distance. It was not an attack. It was a whisper. A whisper that screamed of a power so absolute it had no need for warships and energy beams. It was the power to reach across the galaxy and touch the heart of their empire, as gently as a feather. The chittering voice of Zythok was gone. There was only stunned, terrified silence from the high command channel. The entire Dominion, for the first time in its history, was speechless. Valen stared at the screen, at the star chart that laid his empire bare, at the calm, patient face of the human ambassador. He finally understood. The Dominion had come here as gods, intending to pass judgment on a lesser species. But they had not found mortals. They had stumbled into the garden of a far older and infinitely more subtle god. A god that did not rule through force but through perfect, silent understanding. "Your species," Valen began, his voice barely a whisper. "You are not a chaotic anomaly. You are the opposite. You are a hidden order, an order so complete you can afford to cultivate chaos as a tool." "We prefer the term stewards, High Executor," Rostova corrected gently. "We do not rule, we watch, we learn, and we wait. We do not interfere unless absolutely necessary. Your arrival here with a fleet armed for pacification on the border of one of our most precious sanctuaries that has made it necessary." Her meaning was clear. This was the first and only warning. The human fleet was not in orbit. It was not hiding behind a moon. The human fleet was the V. Fabric of space around them. The silent watchers who could, at any moment, decide to cease watching and begin to act. The ships of the Dominion, these magnificent engines of war, were nothing more than relics, floating in an ocean whose depths they had never even suspected. Valen slowly raised one of his appendages, a gesture that silenced the panicked whispers that had begun to rise on his bridge. He looked at the faces of his crew, at the reflection of their shock and fear in the polished obsidian walls. He saw the end of an era, the end of the Dominion's absolute certainty, the end of their belief that they were the galaxy's ultimate power. He turned back to the screen, to the woman who represented a civilization that had made a virtue of invisibility. "Ambassador Rostova," he said, and the words felt heavy, monumental. "I am ordering my fleet to stand down. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." The aftermath of the revelation rippled through the Dominion of Cathar like a seismic shockwave. Valen's decision to stand down was not questioned. The evidence was irrefutable, transmitted from the indomitable will to the nexus of providence in a silent, terrifying data burst. The perfect galactic map, the impossible energy manipulation, the calm, unassailable confidence of the human ambassador. It was a strategic checkmate delivered before the game had even begun. Lord Strategist Zythok was silenced, his calls for aggression now sounding like the ravings of a fool. The conclave, for the first time in millennia, was faced with a truth it could not conquer, could not assimilate, and could not ignore. They were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. The Great Pacification Fleet remained at the edge of the Sol system, but its posture was no longer one of threat. It was the posture of a supplicant. Valen was granted full authority by the matriarch to open a dialogue, to learn, to understand the nature of this colossal power they had so dangerously provoked. The initial conversations took place across the void, between the bridge of the indomitable will and Ambassador Restova's small, solitary vessel, the Odyssey. But it soon became clear that true understanding required a more direct interface. Restova proposed a meeting, not in person, but through a full-immersion neural link, a technology the humans had perfected that allowed two minds to share a conceptual space, a world built of pure information where ideas could be exchanged without the filter of language or physiology. Valen accepted. He was secluded in his private chambers, a sterile, angular room aboard the flagship. He lay on a cold metal slab as his technicians fitted the neural interface crown to his head. He felt a moment of trepidation. To open his mind to an alien, a human, was a violation of every Cathari precept of security and self-containment. But it was a necessary risk. To face the unknown, one had to be willing to be changed by it. The world dissolved into a wash of light and then reformed. He was no longer in his chambers. He was standing on a hill under a sky of impossible blue. A gentle warmth, which he identified as the light of a yellow sun, touched his carapace. The air carried complex scents of vegetation and water. Below him, a city of gleaming white towers rose from a lush green landscape, its architecture a harmonious blend of organic curves and precise geometric lines. It was a place of profound peace. Ambassador Restova stood beside him. She was no longer a two-dimensional image on a screen. She was a tangible presence, her form rendered with perfect fidelity. She wore the same simple blue garment. "Welcome, High Executor Valen," she said, her voice now seeming to emanate from the air itself. "This is a constructed space, a safe place for our minds to meet, a representation of one of our ideals." Valen looked at the city. It was a vision of perfect order, of a society in complete harmony with its environment. It was, in many ways, the very ideal the Dominion strived for. "This is your hidden civilization?" he asked, his voice a disembodied thought in the shared space. "This is a blueprint," she corrected gently. "A goal. Our true civilization is not one place but a network of countless different societies, each exploring a different path to enlightenment. Some, like this, pursue harmony. Others embrace artifice, living in purely digital realms. Some are nomadic, their entire culture contained within city ships that drift through the great voids. Our unity is not in form, but in purpose." "And that purpose?" Valen asked. "To understand," she replied simply. "To observe the universe in all its complexity and to learn from it, and to safeguard the potential for new life, new ideas to emerge. That is why we create sanctuaries like Earth. We call it the Sanctuary Protocol. We believe that a species' greatest discoveries are made during its turbulent youth, in the struggle for survival and meaning be. For it achieves cosmic awareness. To interfere, to give them the answers before they have asked the questions, is to rob them of their most important journey." Valen contemplated this. The Dominion's philosophy was the exact opposite. They believed their duty was to provide the answers, to lift younger species out of their violent adolescence and give them the gift of stability. They saw it as an act of compassion, of paternalistic order. "You would let them suffer?" Valen asked, the thought colored by the Cathari aversion to waste and inefficiency. "You would watch them wage wars, poison their planet, and drive themselves to the brink of extinction, and you would do nothing." "We do not let them perish," Restova clarified. "There are contingencies, subtle interventions, an asteroid that inexplicably changes course, a scientific breakthrough that appears as a sudden stroke of inspiration to a scientist on the verge of a discovery. We are gardeners, not conquerors. We pull the most dangerous weeds, but we allow the garden to grow wild, for it is in that wilderness that the most beautiful and resilient flowers bloom. The society you observed on Earth is on the brink of one such breakthrough. They are close to achieving a unified consciousness, of moving beyond their tribal conflicts. It would have been a tragedy of cosmic proportions for your fleet to have arrived and pruned them just as they were about to blossom. The weight of what he had almost done, of the future he had almost extinguished, settled upon Valen. He saw his own civilization in a new light. The Dominion, in its relentless pursuit of order, had created a galaxy that was stable, but also stagnant. It had silenced countless voices, pruned countless gardens, all in the name of a singular, rigid ideal. "You have a name for your civilization?" he asked. "We have no need for one," she answered. "Names are for distinguishing oneself from others. We are humanity. The part of us that lives on Earth is as much humanity as we are. They are our past, our memory, and our hope for a future we cannot yet imagine. We are simply the part that grew up." They walked through the simulated city, their thoughts flowing freely. Valen learned of human history, a saga of unbelievable violence and equally unbelievable compassion. He learned of their philosophy, which embraced paradox and uncertainty as fundamental aspects of existence, rather than flaws to be eliminated. He began to understand that their power did not come from their technology, which was clearly eons beyond the Dominion's. It came from their psychological depth, their mastery of their own complex emotional nature. They had not suppressed their chaos, they had integrated it. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. "Why reveal yourselves to us now?" Valen asked. "You could have remained hidden. You could have subtly guided our fleet away as you guided that asteroid." "Because your Dominion has reached a tipping point," Rostova explained, her tone becoming more serious. "You have expanded to the point where your methods, your philosophy of enforced order were about to cause irreparable harm, not just to Earth but to the galaxy itself. Life is not a machine to be perfected, High Executor. It is an ecosystem. It requires diversity, even messy, chaotic diversity, to thrive. Your quest for a perfect monoculture was threatening to turn this entire galaxy into a sterile desert. We intervened because your next step would have been a mistake from which the galaxy might never have recovered. We are showing ourselves to you now as an offer, an invitation to rethink, to evolve." Rethink, the word from the title of the data file on Earth. It had been a mission to make them rethink. Now, it was his own civilization that was being forced to do so. The irony was as vast as the galaxy itself. Their communion lasted for what felt like days. When Valen finally withdrew from the neural link, the sterile gray walls of his chamber felt foreign and confining. He had been shown a universe of infinite possibility, and his own world now seemed small, its certainties brittle. He went to the bridge, where his crew awaited his orders, their multifaceted eyes filled with uncertainty. He opened a channel to the Nexus, to the entire conclave, to the matriarch herself. He did not give a military report. He did not speak of threats or strategy. He spoke of what he had learned. He spoke of the sanctuary protocol, of the philosophy of stewardship, of a power based not on control but on understanding. He advocated not for an alliance, which implied a relationship between equals for mutual gain, but for something far more profound, a tutelage. He proposed that the Dominion of Cathar, the proud masters of the galaxy, should become students. The idea was heresy. It was a complete inversion of their entire culture, but it was supported by the undeniable evidence of humanity's power and the deep. Resonant truth in the words Valen now spoke. He had been changed by his contact with humanity, and through him, the first seeds of a monumental change were planted in the heart of the Dominion. The conclave debated for an unprecedented length of time. The old ways died hard, but faced with the choice between a rigid pride that would lead to their inevitable obsolescence and a humility that offered a path to a greater understanding, they made the logical choice. They chose to learn. A new era began. The pacification fleet became the first diplomatic armada. Cathari scholars and scientists engaged in a careful, respectful exchange with the hidden human civilization. The Dominion began to slowly, painstakingly transform its philosophy, shifting from conquerors to protectors, from enforcers to observers. Valen became the chief architect of this new relationship, a bridge between two vastly different forms of existence. He and Ambassador Rostova continued their conversations, building a foundation of trust between their peoples. The galaxy, for the first time in eons, felt full of promise, of new beginnings. It was during one of these deep exchanges, in the shared mental space they had constructed, that Rostova decided the time had come for humanity to share its final, and most important, secret. The true reason for their long silence. The true reason for their vast, hidden network of observers. "There is one more thing you must understand, Valen," she said. They were standing on a simulated platform looking out at a swirling nebula of creation. "Our stewardship, our sanctuary protocol, it is not just a philosophical choice. It is a practical necessity. We are not just watching the younger species of this galaxy. We are listening to something else, something from outside." She gestured, and the beautiful nebula dissolved. They were now in a representation of utter blackness, the absolute void between galaxies. In the distance, a single point of light pulsed, faint and rhythmic. It was not a star. It was a signal. "We call it the Great Silence," Rostova said, her voice now devoid of its usual warmth, replaced by a cold, ancient gravity. "But it is not empty. For as long as we have been able to listen, we have detected this. An echo. A repeating, structured signal that originates from a point millions of light-years outside our galactic cluster." A stream of data flowed into Valen's consciousness. It was the signal translated into Cathari mathematics. It was a pattern of immense complexity, a message of pure information. But it was not a greeting. It was not a declaration. It was a lament. "It is not a single message," Rostova continued. "It is a palimpsest, a recording layered upon itself for billions of years. It is the final testament of countless civilizations from countless galaxies, all of them speaking of the same thing, a force, a phenomenon that moves between the galaxies through the deep void. They have many names for it: the consuming shadow, the field of unmaking, the static at the end of all things. It is not an empire. It is not a life form as we would understand it. It is a wave of termination, a force that erases complexity. It reduces civilizations, stars, and entire galaxies to a state of uniform, thermodynamic equilibrium. It is the universe's slow, inevitable decay, given a terrifying, predatory intelligence." Valen processed the information. The mathematical models within the signal were horrifying. They described a pattern of galactic disappearances, of light and energy signatures simply ceasing. The signal was a library of ghosts, each one adding its voice to the choir before it, too, was silenced. "The signal is a warning," Valen realized, the thought a shard of ice in his mind. "It is more than a warning," Rostova corrected. "It is an archive, a final act of defiance. Each civilization that encounters it adds its knowledge, its history, its art to the signal, broadcasting it into the void in the hope that someone, somewhere, will be able to do what they could not: stop it. The signal has been getting stronger. Its source is moving, and it is moving in our direction." The truth fell into place, a final, terrible piece of the puzzle. Humanity's long game, their hidden nature, their observation of the galaxy. It was not about philosophy, it was about survival. They were not just protecting the galaxy's burgeoning life out of a sense of moral duty. They were cultivating it. They were trying to foster as much diversity, as much creativity, as much unpredictable strength as possible. They were trying to build an army of ideas, an army of minds. "You were preparing," Valen said, his voice filled with a dawning, terrifying awe. "All this time, you were not hiding from us. You were preparing for it." "We do not know if it can be fought," Rostova admitted, her composure for the first time showing a crack, a glimpse of the immense burden her people carried. "But the Combine." Knowledge of 1,000 dead galaxies suggests one thing: no single species, no matter how powerful, has ever survived it. The only hope is a chorus of voices, a symphony of unique solutions, the Cathari obsession with order, the human affinity for chaos, the myriad perspectives of all the other lives you have governed and we have watched. All of it may be needed. None of it may be enough. The simulation faded away, leaving Valen back in his chamber on the indomitable will. But the cold of the room was nothing compared to the chill that now settled in his very soul. He looked out of his viewport at the stars, at the beautiful, serene river of the Milky Way. It no longer looked like a realm of infinite possibility. It looked like a fragile island in an endless, encroaching sea of black. The Dominion had targeted Earth. They had come to a small, blue world full of arrogance and certainty, intending to impose their will. And in response, humanity had not just made them rethink their empire. They had made them rethink existence itself. They had shown them a war that was not for territory or resources, but for the right of the universe to be complex, to be beautiful, to be alive. The conflict between the Cathar and humanity was over. A much older, much larger, and much more terrifying conflict was about to begin. And for the first time, they would face it together.